Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Maham. Brilliant. Okay. All right. Let's get down to this. Okay. Yeah, and Maham, if you could just let anyone else into the room if they start coming in.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, this is looking good. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. This is the 5th session of Ibn Arabi's religious pluralism course. And thank you all for coming. So, right, let's just get to it then. So, now we are going to cover, and we have covered quite a bit of material, right? So, I always want to, I always want to make sure that you guys are able to follow what's happening. So, I might be repeating basic points very briefly from time to time, right? So, we start off with that the Sharia of Muhammad is all encompassing and it abrogates what came before it and establishes its own ahkam. But one of its own ahkam is to preserve the previous religions, right? So that begs the question now, uh, that hukam historically has been the jizya, right? But as you might suspect, that is by no means the only way to include them, and that is not the only hukam, right? And if that is the case, that begs the question, what other ahkam are there? So let's briefly go through this. Now, this session is kind of connected to the previous session. So you could think of the previous session, which is on baqa and subsistence, as part 1, and this is baqa and subsistence part 2, right? So they're both interconnected. So when we talk about the sharia, the previous sharias that came before the time of Muhammad, right? There are 124,000 prophets. There are therefore 124,000 laws that preceded his and belong to him, right? And so it also raises the question that in practical terms, what does it mean exactly to include the other religions under his law, right? Is it that they have the right to practice their religion? Yes, but there's also much more, right? And we are about to find out how exactly that is the case, right? So it's kind of like in this silly diagram that I've made, if you'll excuse my PowerPoint skills, right? You've got the Sharia Muhammad as the overarching law, and within it, you've got all the other laws that encompass them. Now, we're going to see in the coming presentations that it's not just the laws of the prophets that are included. So those are the 124,000 laws, they're prophetic laws. It includes man-made laws that are non-prophetic laws, the laws of the sages. But we won't deal with that in this lesson. That's going to come later on. Okay, and this whole thing starts with chapter 36, which I've given to you as a reading exercise. And if you weren't able to read in Arabic, do not worry. We're going to go through it in English. English and Arabic, actually. Okay, so the first part of this section that opens with the chapter, that opens with chapter 36 is to do with prophetic inheritance and the idea of dhawq. What is dhawq? It means taste, but in Sufi terminology, it acquires a technical term, which means it is your ability to taste the spiritual realities themselves, and especially when they are differentiated amongst prophets, right? So we'll see what that means in a second. Okay, so let's start. So then, this is the beginning of chapter 36 of the Futuhat, right? It's one of the more interesting chapters. Not that the rest aren't interesting; they're all very interesting. But this has been the subject of some study, right? And maybe I included the study of Chodkovich in this session. I don't know if I included that as reading material, but if I didn't, let me know. So he starts off by saying, "Alam, no, أيدك Allah, may God help you and give you assistance. أنه لما كان شرع محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم يتضمن جميع الشرائع المتقدمة وأنه ما بقي لها حكم في هذه الدنيا إلا ما قررته الشريعة المحمدية," right? that when the law of Muhammad arose, it's included the entirety of all the previous laws that preceded his law, right? And that there's nothing left from any of the rulings that can be established, which are called the furu', right? The branches, the practical ramifications of the laws in this world, except for what the Muhammadan law has confirmed. فَبِتَقْرِيرِهَا ثَبَتَتْ. It is by his confirmation, when the Muhammadan law confirms that ruling, it becomes established. فَتَعَبَّدْنَا بِهَا. Then we worship through it. بِهَا, right? فَتَعَبَّدْنَا بِهَا نُفُوسنا. من حيث إن Muhammad from the perspective that Muhammad قررها, from the perspective that he confirmed it. Even though if these previous rulings that he confirmed belong to previous prophets, nevertheless, لا من حيث إن النبي المخصوص بها في وقته قررها. We don't follow it from the perspective that the previous prophet had that ruling. We follow from the perspective that Muhammad confirmed that ruling, right? Even though in terms of time, temporal succession, it came before him. فلهذا أوتي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم جوامع الكلم. It was because of this he was given the all-comprehensive words. Now, فإذا, so this is a spelling mistake. That's why I highlighted it in red. It's actually not, that's not فأذن, it's فإذا. فإذا عمل المحمدي, what's called amal is a technical term in fiqh, because when you belong to a sharia, you labor under that sharia as by being made mukallaf. You're given a duty, you're charged by your master, who is your Lord God. And when you perform the duty he has given you and prescribed for you, then you are rewarded for it, right? That's called an amal. فالعمل محمدي, it is Muhammadan. With respect to the law. وجميع العالم المكلف اليوم من الإنس والجن محمديون. And the entirety of the world that is being charged with the law today, with regard to not just human beings but jinn, is Muhammadan. فليس في العالم اليوم, there is nothing in the world today, right, that is legally binding شرع إلهي, that is divinely law, سوى هذا الشرع المحمدي, except for this Muhammadan law. فلا يخلو, now فلا يخلو هذا العامل, right, من هذه الأمة. So this does not negate, يخلو literally means this is not devoid of, this does not negate that the worker, right, who's laboring under his master's ruling, who is God, in this Muhammadan community, right, this does not negate and stop him from encountering in his work في عمله فيما يفتح له, with regard to what may be opened up to him, right? So this does not stop him from encountering openings. فيما يفتح له منه في قلبه. This does not stop him from encountering things that might open up in his heart and on his road. وطريقه ويتحقق به طريقة من طرق نبي من الأنبياء. This does not stop him from encountering the paths of the other prophets. This does not stop him from encountering the paths of the other prophets, nevertheless, in his heart. المتقدمين, who preceded him. مما تتضمنه هذه الشريعة, with respect to what the Sharia encompasses. وقررت طريقته, and it has confirmed that road. وصحبتها, and then he journeys along this road. ونتيجته, and he experiences its results. فإذا فتح له بذلك, if this opens up to him, فإنه ينتسب إلى صاحب تلك الشريعة, right? He then becomes joined to the owner of that sharia, whichever prophet that is, right? فيقال له فيه عيساوي أو موسوي أو إبراهيم, right? So then they say about him that he is Isawi or Musawi or Ibrahimi. What on earth does that mean? Let me go back. My apologies. So, right. Just let me finish this, actually. It's better, and then I'll explain it in the next slide, actually. Okay. وذلك لتحقيق. So this is so he can not just confirm, but verify. He can verify and distinguish ما تميز له من المعرف, right? He can distinguish between the different kinds of knowledges. وظهر له من المقام من جملة ما هو تحت حيطة شريعة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? He can confirm that whatever appears from this station in its entirety belongs to the hita, to the orbit of Muhammad's law. So it all comes under Muhammad's law, right? فيتميز بتلك النسبة, so he distinguishes between each prophetic relation. Which one is Isawi, that belongs to Isa? Which one is Musawi, which belongs to Musa Isam? Which one is Idrisi, which one belongs to Idris? Which one is Yusufi, belongs to Yusuf? And so on for all 124,000 prophets. أو بذلك النسب من غيره, or to whichever one it is. ليعرف أنه ما ورث من محمد. So he knows that whatever is inherited, right, is inherited from Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? إلا ما لو كان موسى أو غيره من الأنبياء حيا واتبعه ما ورث إلا ذلك منه. Even if Moses or any of the other prophets were to be alive today, right, and their followers, that no one inherits anything apart from inheriting it from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even if he inherits from Musa and Isa and Ibrahim, it's through Muhammad that he gets to inherit those previous prophetic inheritances, right? Now, what that means is that the prophetic inheritances that the prophetic laws, ways, and paths that existed in the past are still available to us through the Muhammadan Sharia, right? What does it mean to be Musawi or Isawi or Ibrahimi? If you have taken the previous course on Ibn Arabi's life, you will know what this means. But very briefly, it means that you, as a wali, as a saint of Allah, you can be a saint of Allah and His wali, but in what way? You have to inherit your knowledge from a certain prophet. So it can come from any prophet. Your knowledge and your way of acting as a wali and your mode of being comes from a certain prophet, right? So then when you are attached, when you become attached to a certain prophet, then you inherit their knowledge, their miracles, and even their personality, their way of seeing the world. And so this is called dhawq. This is you tasting the reality. So for example, as we'll see in this chapter, this whole chapter is dedicated to the way of Isa alayhi salam. If you're Isawi, for example, your personality, your demeanor is what? Jamali. It's one of beauty. You see the world through the lens of beauty. And you act through beauty. And we'll see how towards the end of the presentation. If you're Musawi, your demeanor is Jalali. It's majestic, right? The miracles that come from that. In the Old Testament, when Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam descended from Mount Sinai and he was carrying the Torah, his face illuminated with beaming, shining light. We preserve the same tradition. And we also held that you had to, Musa alayhi salam had to cover his face with a hijab, because if he didn't, then not only would the person looking at his face be blinded, he would die straight away. That's the sheer nature of his majesty, right? So the Musawi saint today inherits that, or he can inherit that. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, when you inherit the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam, you are tried and tested with being misunderstood, right? And so one of his characteristics is to sigh a lot. And he's awah. He sighs a lot because he's unable to give the majesty of God its due justice, right? As he contemplates the divine majesty, right? So then you're tried and tested with what Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was tested with. That's what it means to be an inheritor of that prophet, and to have a taste of that reality, right? And so it's through this kind of framework we can understand the words of Al-Hallaj alayhi salam, right? He's a Muslim, but what does he say? He says, فَفِي دِينَ صَلِيبٍ يَكُونُ مَوْتِي. Who wants to translate that?
Does it mean that in the, sorry, can I try?
Yeah, go ahead.
Salib, the cross?
That's right, yes.
So in the path or the religion of the cross is my death. Like that's like his ending, or that's like his annihilation, I guess, or his
Okay,
end goal.
thank you so much. Absolutely. It is in the religion of the cross I will die. And so that sounds like, if you don't understand the way these spiritual paths work, it sounds like he became confessionally a Christian, but he did not become a Christian confessionally. So that would be like leaving his religion. He didn't do that. But it means I will die upon the tasting, the dhawq of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, right? Um, and so it's super interesting, because if that's the case with the prophets, does this mean that there could also be, you would be able to taste the reality and the secrets of the sages as well, since the Sharia of Muhammad encompasses them all as well? Is there such a thing as a tasting, a dhawq of Iflatun, of Plato? Is there a Buddhist tasting? Is there a tasting of Pythagoras? And is there Empedoclean tasting? And I'm not making this up, because the great philosophical Arif Billah, Suhrawardi al-Maqtul, had a Platonic and Empedoclean tasting. He took the Asrar of Empedocles and reworked them into an Islamic system, right? So when Empedocles talks about the forces of the universe called love and strife, love attracts and strife repels, he translates that into al-mahabba wal-qahr. He inherits that same tasting. Is there a hermetic dhawq inherited from the great Egyptian sages, like Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes al-Muthallith bil-Hikmah, right? Is there Zoroastrian tasting, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so let's carry on. Excuse me, sorry. Okay. ولما تقدمت شرائعهم قبل هذه الشريعة جعلنا هذا العارف وارثا. Sorry, excuse me. Can someone, 1 second. Okay, Shifa doesn't have the link to this. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Maham. Great. Okay. I think my internet connection is unstable. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. Okay. ولما تقدمت شرائعهم قبل هذه الشريعة جعلنا هذا العارف وارثا. We made this knower to be an inheritor when we knew that the previous laws preceded the coming of the law of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إذ كان الورث للآخر من الأول, right? Since the one who comes later inherits from the one who comes before. فلو لم يكن لذلك الأول شرع مقرر قبل تقرير محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لساوينا الأنبياء والرسول, right? If it were not valid and confirmed in that sense, then we'd make all the prophets and messengers to be equal to one another, but they're not, right? They'd all be the same. إذ, since جمعنا زمان وشريعة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم كما يساوينا اليوم الياس والخضر وعيسى إذ نزل فإن الوقت يحكم عليه, right? So, but like we do today, we make all the prophets equal to one another today. How are all the prophets equal to one another today? They are all tabi'. And Muhammad sallallahu he's matbu'. None of the prophets today has the right to make a hukum in the Sharia outside of what Muhammad made. They must follow his Sharia. Now he says, he gives you the examples of the prophets, Jesus and Elias, Elijah and Khidr. Why is this? And you can ask that Idris, why does he mention these 4 prophets specifically? These 4 prophets are equal today, right? And followers of the Sharia of Muhammad. Why does he mention them? He mentions these 4 prophets because they are alive today. According to Islamic tradition, they are alive. Sayyidina Isa in heaven, Sayyidina Idris in the sphere of the sun, and Khidr and Elias on earth. They're still alive today. So given that these prophets are alive today, like they have supernatural lifespans, given that they are alive today, they must follow the law of Muhammad. They can't follow their own laws, right? Okay. There's no prophetic legislating after time of Muhammad, right? There's no law giving after his time. You can't create new law after him. If you make law, it's by his permission within his Sharia. ولا يقال في أحد من أهل هذه الطريقة إنه محمدي. So we don't say about anyone on this path that he's specifically Muhammadan, right? Except for two kinds of people, two kinds of men, but really it can also be women, by the way. But he uses rajul in a specific technical sense. So it can also be two women. Okay, either the man or woman اختصوا بميراث علم حكم لم يكن في شرع قبله فيقال فيه محمدي. Someone who has inherited a hukum that was made by Muhammad ﷺ, but explicitly for Sharia that was not shared by the previous laws, he's called Muhammadan, right? Or إما رجل, or a man or woman. جمع المقامات, he brings together all the stations. ثم خرج عنها إلى مقام لا مقام. Then he ascends to the final station. It's called the station of no station, like Abu Yazid Bastami وامثاله and his likes. That person is also called Muhammadan. وأما عداء هذين الرجلين فينسب إلى نبيا من الأنبياء. But other than these two, he's always attributed to one of the other prophets. And this is for this reason ولهذا ورد في الخبر that the prophetic report has come down to us. It's not exactly hadith, it's a prophetic report. أن العلماء ورثة الأنبياء. The knowers of God, you can translate as scholars, but really it's more like the knowers. The knowers of God are the inheritors of the prophets. And ولم يقل ورثة نبي خاصا. He didn't say the inheritors of one specific prophet. No, the inheritors of the prophets, whichever one you inherit from. والمخاطب بهذا علماء هذه الأمة. And it is this ummah that is being addressed, this community. وقد ورد أيضا بهذا اللفظ قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Also, it's come down to us. علماء هذه الأمة أنبياء سائر الأمم. وفي رواية كأنبياء بني إسرائيل. The ulama of this ummah are like the prophets of the children of Israel, right? They follow the paths of the other prophets that they inherit from and legislate according to what? The ahkam of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, given that, now we can start talking about the Isawiyun, the Christic saints who take after and inherit from Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. فالعيساويون الأول هم الحواريون اتباع عيسى عليه السلام. The first, maybe you could say the first Christic saints, but it's more like the primary Christic saints. They are the Hawariyun. And these Hawariyun, they're mentioned in the Quran, of course, right? And when Sayyidina Isa asked, who will help me? They said, we will help you, right? And now, to this day, there is a category of sainthood, and they're called the Hawariyun. I think there's at least one in every age who helps the ummah of each age. And he's called the Hawari. So these Hawariyun they're the followers of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. فَمَنْ أَدْرَكَ مِنْهُمْ إِلَى الْآنَ شرع محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وآمن به واتبعه واتفق أن يكون قد حصل له من هذه الشريعة. Right? So if any one of them reaches the law of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم today, then what they do is they believe in him and follow Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, and their actions are in agreement with whatever his law requires, right? قد حصل له من هذه الشريعة ما كان قبل هذا شرعا لعيسى عليه السلام. So he's going to show you in a few minutes how exactly that happens. How can someone from the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, who was there 600 years before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reach the time of Muhammad? Well, he talks about a specific monk. We mentioned him last time. His name is called Ibn Barthamla, or the son of Bartholomew. He's one of the original disciples of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, or his son. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him the karama, the miracle of having like a super long life, super longevity. So he could live for hundreds of years. So if he is one of these companions of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, and he lives long enough to reach the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he comes under the law of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فيرث من عيسى عليه السلام ما ورثه من غير حجاب. So he inherits from Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam whatever he inherits, but without a veil, so directly. ثم then he inherits again from Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, but in the law في شريعة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, in the law of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, ميراثا تابعا من تابع لا من مطبوعا. So he's inheriting what? He is a follower inheriting from another follower. Isa is a follower. Why is he a follower? Who does he follow? Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم in our time. لا من مطبوعا. He's not inheriting from one who is a matbu'a. Who is the matbu'a? The one being followed? It's Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. وبينهما, and between these two, في ذوق وبينهما في الذوق, the difference between these two with respect to tasting, there's a difference في فرقان. ولهذا قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في مثل هذا الشخص, and that's why Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم said in a hadith regarding someone like this, إن له الأجر مرتين, he gets two rewards. And كذلك, and likewise كذلك له ميراثان, two inheritances, وفتحان, or two openings, وذوقان, two tastings, مختلفان, two different tastings, two different openings, two different inheritances, two different ways of perceiving reality. ولا ينسب فيهما إلا إلى ذلك النبي, but he's attributed to only that what? Prophet. Now, let me just double check and see if I didn't skip anything. Okay, good. So now he goes on to talk about something very interesting, right? And this is connected to the Christic heritage, which is iconography. Okay. So then he says, فهؤلاء هم العيساويون الثواني وأصولهم توحيد وتجريد من طريق المثال، لأن وجود عيسى عليه السلام لم يكن عن ذكر بشريا، وإنما كان عن تمثل روح في صورة بشر. So he says, so these are the secondary Christic saints, and أصولهم, their foundation, their root is what? توحيد التجريد, which is the tawheed, the unity of tajreed. The word tajreed means to peel something off, to strip it off, to divest, to free it, to remove it, right? Tajreed also means asceticism, but not exactly in this context, right? So it's to remove something. It can also mean abstraction, to abstract a concept. So you could call the tawheed of abstraction or the tawheed of divestment by way of what? By way of images. What does that mean? You'll see in a minute. He says, because the very being, the existence of Jesus, peace be upon him, lam yukun, did not happen by way of a male human being, right? But it only happened by way of a تمثل روح of في صورة بشر, of a spirit that took shape in the form of a human being. What does that mean? We're also going to explain that as well. So I guess we might as well explain it now. So now, what he is saying here, well, actually, let's just finish this line first. ولهذا, it's because of this, غلب على أمة عيسى ابن مريم دون سائر الأمم القول بالصورة. It's because of this that the community of Jesus, son of Mary, apart from the other communities, the other nations, that the belief in forms predominates, right? فيصورون في كنائسهم مثلا. So then they make shapes and forms of these representations and icons in their churches. ويتعبدون أنفسهم بالتوجه إليها, and they worship. They put themselves in worship by facing those icons and images. فإن أصل نبيهم, because the root of their own Prophet عليه السلام كان عن تمثل, right? فصارت تلك الحقيقة في أمته إلى الآن. Because his own prophet, the source and foundation of their own prophet, came by way of he himself. فإن أصل نبيهم كان عن, because his own their own prophet was made when but it was made by means, excuse me, it was made by means of a representation itself. And that reality flows in his community to this day. So what is he talking about? So we can be very clear on this. People, Christians, make images in their churches because their own prophet was made by way of an image. How is this possible? What does that mean? Let's go back to Surah Maryam, right? So when Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam appears to Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, right? The ayah, so this is verse 17, and it says, فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. Who wants to translate that?
He came in the image of a perfect human.
Okay. He came in the image of a perfect human. Yes. Because normally you will see this word translated as he appeared to her in the form of a human being, which is correct. And then he blew the ruh into her, right? But that's not what the Arabic says. The Arabic says, فَتَمَثَّلَ. He turned himself into an image, a representation. He made himself a muthal, a mathal. So, in other words, he iconized himself. He iconized himself to Mary and then blew the spirit. So, it's because of that. If Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam can become an image himself by the explicit words of the Quran, that's why you have what? Ibn Arabi's literalism. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, tamathal. Tamathal. That's exactly what it means. If the source of the law itself and Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, so this is called the Annunciation. If in the Annunciation, right, he himself turned himself into an image, right, then that legitimates and legitimizes the use of images for Christians in their own communities. And that's exactly one, it gives them permission to make images in their churches because that's rooted in the very foundation of their own law, which is the revelation given by Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. And secondly, it forms a part of their character and nature, as if subconsciously they feel compelled to do it because this is how their own prophet was made, right? Now, so creating images is permissible in the Sharia of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, which is extraordinary. I don't think anyone except Ibn Arabi has given us this explanation. Now, you also see that the question of images, which is normally a contentious question, becomes now an issue of law. It's not an issue of aqidah. It's an issue of law. Are you permitted to do it or not? That's why we have the second example of the second prophet, who is Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salam. And in another surah, which I think is Surah Fatir, if I'm not mistaken, the word which is mentioned is that the jinn made for him a number of things, and the jinn constructed for him tamathil. What are tamathil? Statues. Statues, also pictures, images, icons, right? And then in the tafsir of Zamakhshari, he says, commenting on that ayah, it's actually from Surah 34. The jinn made for Sulaiman alayhi salam whatever he wished of sanctuaries and statues, tamathil, right? So then Zamakhshari says that these statues were images of angels, prophets, and the salihun, the righteous people, made out of copper, brass, and glass. So then he said people would gaze at those statues, and so then it would enter their hearts to improve their worship so that they could be just like those prophets and righteous men they were gazing upon. So then Zamakhshari poses the question: if you ask me, how did Sulaiman alayhi salam permit the work of fashioning forms and shapes? Because it's not allowed in Islam. So then I say, as Zamakhshari, I say, this is what was permissible with the differences in revealed law. مع اختلاف الشرائع. It is not one of these. It is not one of the things that are reprehensible to the intellect, like lying or injustice. Like lying and injustice is forbidden across all the laws. For example, it's one of those things that can be permitted in one law, but then not permitted in another law. So then it's also narrated that the throne of Sulaiman was magnificent and had the shapes of all sorts of animals on it, but I won't get into that. So then he says, so this shows that fashioning forms was permissible at that time and was abrogated by the law of Muhammad, right? Except Ibn Arabi, and Ibn Arabi's definition of abrogation, it doesn't just mean cancelment, it means inclusion, right? But according, now we'll get into the question of inclusion in a minute, so I won't address that right now, right? But you can see here why it's permissible for them to use images. Now, he calls it Tawheed al-Tajreed. So let's talk about that for 1 second. How does this work? You face the image, right? And then you go into worship. It's kind of like silent prayer. You then transcend and go beyond the image to the principle of Tawheed that lies behind the image. Because in other words, physical forms lead you to spiritual realities. Sayyidina Jibreel was a spirit. It was a spirit who took form. So the form can lead you back to the spirit. So you peel back the image in your mind, which is tajreed, and you see the spiritual tawheed that lies behind the image. This is tawheed al-tajreed min tariq al-mithal, right? Any questions on that?
I was wondering, does he talk about, I think it was Isa alayhi salam who also had the miracle of creating, like, I think hay'at al-tayr, right? Like the shape of birds and then blowing the ruh into them, bi'idhnillah. But I guess that could be another justification for them creating like 3D forms even.
It could be, although I think the average Christian denomination today does not accept that story. They think it's apocryphal, but that's a really good point. Exactly, because the clay bird is also a form, and then you breathe the spirit into that form. Yeah, thank you very much. Good point. And it could be that iconography is like a screen protector of spirituality. Yes, exactly. When we get into, if you study Greek Orthodox Christianity and Greek Orthodox iconography, you see the exact way iconography works, right? So it's super fascinating. Okay, and if any questions come to your mind, yeah, let me know later on. Okay. ولما جاء شرع محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونهى عن الصور, then the law of Muhammad comes and he prohibits images. وهو صلى الله عليه وسلم قد حوى على حقيقة عيسى وأنطوى شرعه في شرعه. What does that mean? It means then the law of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم came, he prohibited images, and then he includes and encompasses and surrounds the reality of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, and enfolds, Antawa is to enfold, enfolds the law of Jesus into his own law. Antawa is an interesting word because it means it's close to andaraja. Antawa is you say tawi al-ard for the awliya. What's tawi al-ard? When they walk, they cover long distances because the earth folds itself beneath their feet. That's their miracle. So the law of Muhammad unfolds the law of Jesus. So then he made, so what did he do instead, Muhammad? He made it lawful for us, and na'bud, okay? And na'bud Allah, he made it lawful for us to worship God as if we were seeing, كأن نراه. فأدخله لنا في الخيال. So then he includes God, or he includes the law of Jesus into our imagination. وهذا هو معنى تصوير. And this is the meaning of giving form. You see, so that's the connection between us and Christians. A Christian will make forms in the physical world, and that's permissible to him. But a Muslim can create forms of God in his imagination and worship God through it. We'll come back to this in the last 10th session of this course in more detail. Because it's a fact and reality that everyone creates forms, but you either do it with the mind or you do it with your hand. So we are also form makers, but of the mind and the spirit, and above all, the imagination. We are form makers of the imagination. إلا أنه نهى عنه في الحس. So he only forbade physically. أن يظهر في هذه الأمة بصورة حسية. So he did not allow it to appear in a physical form. ثم إن هذا الشرع الخاص. So it is this our specific law that says هو عبد الله كأنك تراه. Worship God as if you see him. With what? This is kaf called kaf tashbih, with the imagination. ما قاله محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لنا بلا واسطة. Now he didn't say this to us without an intermediary. No, بلى. قاله لجبريل عليه السلام. He said that or rather, he said to Jibril, yeah. So he said it to Jibril alayhi salam when Saint Jibril alayhi salam asked him, what is ihsan, right? وهو الذي تمثل لمريم عليه السلام. And he is the same one who what? تمثل, he made himself into an image to Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam. He turned himself into a basharan sawiyan, into a well-shaped man. عند إيجاد عيسى عليه السلام, upon the creation of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. Like كان كما قيل في مثل. So it's exactly the same thing as is written in the proverb. المثل السائر, the well-known proverb. إياك عني واسمع يا جارة. I'm talking to you, neighbor. So listen up. It's a proverb. So it's like if there's three people in the room and I'm talking to the second person, maybe the second person thinks I'm talking to him, but actually my words are intended for the third person. So I mean you, ya Jara, my neighbor. So listen up. So when Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam comes to this community, to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the shape of a well-formed man, it's not just the words that he gives Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as Quran that are revelation. His own body is revelation. So when he comes to you in the form of a well-shaped man, that's an illusion, that's an ishara to you, that images are permitted to you too, but in a specifically Muhammadan way, in the imagination. Let's do a quick recap. What are the three definitions of abrogation for Ibn Arabi? Okay, the first definition is al-izala, right? What's al-izala? Cancellation. What's the second definition? Al-intiqal, al-naqal. What's that? Transferal and transference. Right? And the third definition is looking right at you, which is al-masakh. And I said we come back to masakh. Is it Sarah? Because someone was asking about masakh the first lesson or second lesson. Or actually, it was the third lesson. Someone was asking about masakh. But I forget who it was. So we're back to Aitaf, right? Yes. So that's Aitaf, right? Okay. So yes, exactly. So we're back to masakh, which is nasakh. Okay. So this is how it works. There is a hukm that belongs to Sayyidina Islam. There's many ahkam. So let's say it's about making images. That's one of his ahkam. Then comes the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? It cancels that hukm because now no longer permissible for Muslims to worship with the use of images, right? But then it gets transferred, and taqala. It gets transferred to the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is al-intiqal, okay? This is still abrogation. But by the time it arrives at the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's the same hukm he's given you, but now you will worship God not with images, but in the imagination. It's transformed. It is a hukm that has undergone metamorphosis. It has metamorphosized and transformed from the hukm of worshiping with physical images to the hukm of worshiping through the imagination. That is masakh. This is an example of masakh. And as you'll come to see, this is also an example of worshiping God in two shari'ah, in two laws. Any questions, if you have them, put them in the chat, please. I'll try and get through this so we can finish in good time. So let's carry on. فكنا نحن المرادين بذلك القول. So we are the ones who are intended with that saying. ولهذا جاء في آخر الحديث. And so it's because of that it came at the end of the hadith that this is Jibril. هذا جبريل أراد أن تعلموا إذا لم تسألوا. He wanted to teach you if you didn't ask. And another narration, جاء ليعلم الناس دينهم. He came to teach the people their religion. وفي رواية أتاكم يعلمكم دينكم. He came to you to teach you your religion, both by coming to you as a physical body and the actual words he spoke. فما خرجت روايات عن كوننا المقصودين بالتعليم ثم لتعلم. Right? So sorry, just let me stop there. So these different narrations don't change the fact that in each narration we are the ones who are intended with that teaching. What is that teaching? He came to us in a physical form. ثم then you should know لتعلم أن الذي لنا من غير شرع عيسى عليه السلام قوله. Then now he will complete the hadith with words that are non-Isawi. They're Muhammadan, they're Muhammadi. فإن لم تكون تراه فإنه يراك. And if you don't see him, know that he sees you. So عبد الله كأنك أنت تراه, that's Isawi. فإن لم تكن تراه فاعلم أنه يراك, and that's Muhammadi. فهذا من أصولهم. And so this is their source. This is their principle. And then he says, وكان شيخنا, then my own sheikh, Abu Abbas al-Uryabi, or excuse me, al-Uraybi. It can also be al-Urayni. Al-Uraybi, rahimahullah, this was Ibn Arabi's first teacher. He was Isawi, he was a Christic في نهايته, at the end of his life. But وهي كانت بدايتنا, but at the beginning of my path, Ibn Arabi is saying, right? وهي كانت بداية, but he was an Isawi saint at the beginning of his spiritual path. وهي كانت بداياتنا عني نهاية شيخنا. So when Ibn Arabi had his first teacher, who was Abu Abbas al-Arabi, at the end of his life was Isawi. And Ibn Arabi was Isawi at the beginning of his path. Right? في هذه الطريقة كانت عيسوية. Okay. then we transferred. ثم نقلنا إلى فتح المسوي الشمسية. Then he transferred to the inheritance of what? Musa عليه السلام. What's called the solar mosaic inheritance. ثم بعد ذلك نقلنا, then we transferred to the inheritance of Hud عليه السلام. ثم بعد ذلك نقلنا إلى جميع النبيين عليهم السلام. Then we transferred to the inheritances of all the prophets, peace be upon them. ثم بعد ذلك نقلنا إلى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Then we transferred to the inheritance of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. هكذا كان أمرنا في هذا الطريق ثبته الله علينا ولا حاد بنا عن سواء السبيل. And Allah strengthened our feet on this path and we did not deviate from it. Right? فأعطانا الله من أجل هذه النشأة التي أنشأنا الله عليها في هذا الطريق وجد الحق في كل شيء. So when he walked the path of this Christic way, he saw, right, the true face of each thing. What is it? And therefore, what is the haqq due to it? So فليس في العالم عندنا, as far as we're concerned, there's nothing in the cosmos that we can look at. في نظرنا, right? In our view, there's nothing in the cosmos, right? فليس شيء موجودا إلا, there's nothing existent except إلا ولنا فيه شهود عين حق نعظمه منه. We see something true in it, and so we give it its due respect, or we magnify it, we venerate it, because I see something true in it, whatever it is in the whole cosmos. نعظمه منه. فلا نرمي بشيء من العالم والوجود. So there's nothing in the world of existential, there's nothing in the existential cosmos, in the world of the cosmos. There's nothing that I would كب الزبالة, I would throw in the dustbin, I would dismiss, that I would discard, or the other meaning of nurmi is to blame. There's nothing I would completely blame or completely deem worthless, because there's always a face of truth in it. That's what you get when you are on the path of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. وفي زماننا, and in our own time, okay, so we're not going to get into this, but he saw that there's a group from the companions of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam and Yunus alayhi salam who are still alive at his time. Now, this is precisely and remarkably how iconography works in Greek Orthodox tradition, or Russian, Syrian, and so on. So icons act as portals through which those, right, through which we can gain access to the spiritual world. And we covered this in the first session, but very briefly, right? So there is a relationship between the viewer and the icon. If the onlooker does not look at the icon and respond as a devotee with veneration, the icon cannot act as a sacrament. It becomes a sacrament when you look at it with the right view and correct behavior, right? That allows you to tap into its power and keeps it flowing, right? That's how you access the power of the icon, and you go beyond into its spiritual capabilities, right? So that's the very important point that Sheikh Al Akbar is making. Um, Another important point, actually, he's saying that the Greek Orthodox Christians aren't worshiping the icons themselves. This is a big debate between Protestants and Greek Orthodox, even Muslims, a misunderstanding by Muslims. Greek Orthodox Christians don't worship the icons. They venerate them, they revere them. So there's a word called latria and proskinesis. Latria is worship. That's reserved only for God. They don't do latria. They only do veneration, proskinesis, right? They use the icons as a springboard to attain spiritual realities, right? This is a beautiful example of Nicholas of Cusa, who was a fan of Muslims, actually. So when he's contemplating the icon of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, he says, Lord my God, the longer I behold your face, the more it appears to me that you cast the gaze of your eyes more acutely upon me. But your true face is free from every form of limitation. It has no quantity, quality, time, or place. It is the absolute form, the face of faces. This is exactly the idea of using the icon as a springboard to see beyond it, right? Tajreed, right? توحيد التجريد عن طريق المثال. You're stripping the image to see the absolute faceless image. This is Orthodox iconography. Another example, there's a monk who belonged to the monastic community at Mount Sinai, and he describes how he acquired an icon of Mary when he was young, uh, sometime before entering the monastery. And he used to keep it in his room with a homemade oil lamp. And this is what he said. So I had my icon and I had my oil lamp, and I would say it became so powerful for me. And I have it even now in my cell after all these years. And it was when I became a novice at the monastery, when you're taking on the whole ascetical way of life and you're devoting a lot of time to prayer, that the icon became like a presence. It would be a little bold to say that it came to life, but it's like that. So instead of just being objects that you look at and analyze critically, and you know the formal theology about it, and you can quote that, then it becomes a living experience. And also, when you would get sick, then you would say prayers, and then you'd feel better, and all of your experiences are then interwoven with the life of prayer, and the icons are a part of that life of prayer. So they all became part of that whole experience. And then sacred images, the visual perception of sacred images can lead to metaphysical visions of the divine, right? And so they posit the operation of a higher imagination. These are the words of Patterson, right? And so he gives you the example of what's called an encaustic portrait. Encaustic means it's made out of wax, right? So this, what you're looking at, is an encaustic portrait of the archangel Michael. So then he's quoting some person, I don't know who he's quoting, but I'll just say it anyways. So he says, with great daring, wax has formed an image of the chief of the angels, so here he's saying, I think it's Michael, who is both invisible and essentially incorporeal. He is bodiless, but it is not without grace. For a man looking at the image directs his response by means of a higher imagination. No longer is his veneration unstable and intermittent, but imprinting the image in himself, he trembles as if the archangel were present. His gaze stimulates deep thought, and so the art of colors is able to launch the prayer of the soul, right? And so this leads us into the question of worshiping God in more than one law, two laws and two rewards. Ibn Bartham law, right? I skipped over some passages, but this is where he starts talking about Ibn Bartham law. He is in two laws, right? So what does it mean to be in two laws, two شرائع؟ وهذا راهب من عيساويين الذين ورثوا عيسى عليه السلام الى الزمان بعثة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم فلما بعث محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم تعبد الله هذا الراهب بشرعه صلى الله عليه وسلم. When the time Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم came, he worshipped in the law of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? So first he worshipped in the law of Jesus, then in the law of Muhammad, right? And then وعلمه من لدنه. So God taught him knowledge from himself. بالرحمة, just like Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salam. So what he also says is that these monks who are isolated in the mountains, who teaches them anything? It's God himself. They walk the path of Khidr, so that God does not neglect them, right? التي أتاه من عنده, which God gave to him from himself. كان ورثه أيضا حالة عيسوية من Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he inherits the spiritual state of Jesus from Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. فلم يزال عيسويا, but he remains Christic في شريعتين, but in two laws, right? ألا ترى هذا الراهب, don't you see this monk? قد أخبر بنزول عيسى عليه السلام. He was informed about the descent and coming of Jesus عليه السلام. وأخبر عنه, and it was informed, we have been informed about him, لأنه إذا نزل, that when Jesus comes, that he would slay the pig and he would break the cross. Do you see أتراه بقي على تحليل لحم الخنزير? Do you see that this monk has remained upon the permissibility of eating swine, pig meat? So Ibn Arabi takes it for granted that's permitted in Christianity. So he says no, he does not take swine meat as permitted, because now he's under the law of Muhammad, but with a Christic spiritual state. And so he is continuing upon the same spiritual path of Christ under the law of Muhammad. So he's in two laws. So you can be under more than one law. And as it turns out, actually, Insan Kamil, what does he do? He worships Allah under all the laws. في جميع الشرائع, under all the laws. So this is how in China, in the 17th century, actually prior to the 17th century too, but we had the likes of Lu Qi, who is called a Confucian scholar. He has the tasting of Confucius alayhi salam, who's a Hakim, he's a sage, but under the law of Muhammad sallam, right? And Lu Qi does not see a contradiction. He considers himself a Confucian Muslim. A Confucian Muslim. He is Muslim and Confucian at the same time, with a Confucian zawq, practicing under the law of Muhammad sallam and the way of Confucius. So this has been done in China already, hundreds of years ago. فلم يزال هذا راهب عيسويا في الشريعتين. He remains in two laws, this monk who is called Ibn Barthamla, son of Bartholomew. فله الأجر مرتين, so he gets the reward two times. أجر اتباعه نبيه, the reward for following his own prophet, which is Jesus, and the أجر اتباعه محمد, and the reward for following Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. وفي انتظار عيسى عليه السلام, he's still waiting for Jesus to come back and descend, right? Yes. So I'm going to skip this part. I apologize because I'm conscientious that we're running out of time. فأصل العيساويين, so the root and principle of the Christic saints, just as we have confirmed كما قرأناه, تجريد التوحيد, is the divestment of unity of Tawheed from what? So it is extracting Tawheed from the outward images that are made by physical representations in the community of Jesus عليه السلام. تجريد التوحيد من الصورة الظاهرة في الأمة العيسوية والمثلية التي لهم في الكنائس, which they have in their churches. من أجل أنهم على شريعة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, by being in the law of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. ولكن, but the spiritual state they're in, ولكن الروحانية الحالية التي هم عليها عيسوية في النصارى, but they have a spiritual state that is Christic for the Christians, ومسوية في اليهود, and is Mosaic for the Jews, but it all comes by way of the niche, the Muhammadan niche. من مشكات محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, من قوله, through his word, عبد الله كأنك تراه, and also through his word, إن الله في قبلة المصلي. So the prayer, the person who's praying, when he is facing his qibla, so the Greek Orthodox Christians face the east, or if you're in the church, you're facing the image, the icon. God is in your qibla. He's in your prayer direction, whichever religion you're in. وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ إِذَا صَلَّى اسْتَقْبَلَ رَبَّهُ. And when the servant is in his prayer, he receives his Lord. وَمِنْ كُلِّ مَا وَرَدَ فِي اللَّهِ مِنْ أَمْثَالِ هَذِهِ النَّسَبَ. Okay, so now we're going to finish off with the miracles that are and the characteristics of a Christic saint. I apologize, I know I've run over time. وليس للعيساوي من هذه الأمة من الكمرات المشي في الهواء ولكن لهم المشي على الماء. So the Christic saint is able to walk on water in this ummah, but the Muhammadan saint flies in the air because of how Muhammad flew in the air with Buraq, right? So the Christic saint walks on water, which is mentioned in the Gospels. He's able to walk on water through the inheritance of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. And then the Isawiyyin, the Christic saints, they have وللعيساويين همة فعالة ودعاء مقبول وكلمات مسموعة. And they have a activated and active himma, which is an aspiration. That's how you translate it. But it's really like a spiritual state where you concentrate your spiritual powers to get what you want. It's manifestation. They have the ability to manifest what they want. And they have accepted du'as. They just make a prayer and Allah accepts whatever prayer they make, and their words are heard by the people. ومن علامات العيساويين, and one of the signs of the Christic saints, if you want to know them, إذا أردت أن تعرفهم فتنظر كل شخص فيه رحمة بالعالم مطلقة وشفقة عليه كان من كان. You look at each person in the entire world with mercy, like absolutely, no matter who he is. You look at each person with mercy and shafaqah and love, right? Whoever he is. وعلى أي دين كان, whatever religion he belongs to, وبأي نحلة ظهر, whichever sect he comes from, وتسليم لله فيهم, and you submit to God in that respect. Like you don't get upset that he belongs to this and this and that religion. You show love and compassion and mercy to all of them. That is Christic. That's a Christic tasting. لا ينطقون بما ضيق صدور له في حق الخلق أجمعين عند خطابهم عباد الله. Whenever they talk to the people, they don't say anything that upsets them, that constricts their chests. That's their nature. They won't say anything that will upset you. ومن علاماتهم أنهم ينظرون من كل شيء أحسنه. They look at everything but with the eye of beauty. They only see what is beautiful in each thing. ولا يجري على ألسنتهم إلا الخير. And nothing emerges from their tongue except what is beautiful and good. واشتركت في ذلك الطبعة الأولى والثانية. Okay. فالأولى, right? There's two examples. مثل ما روي عن عيسى عليه السلام أنه رأى خنزيرا فقال له أنجو بالسلام فقيل له أتقول لخنزير أنجو بالسلام. So the example where Isa is walking by and with his companions and they pass by a pig. So then Jesus says to the pig, go and be in safety and peace. And so the companion said, you're saying that to a pig? And then Jesus said, إني أكره أن أعد لساني إلا الخير. I hate to accustom my tongue to anything except that is good and beautiful. Right? As for the second example, our own Prophet ﷺ, النبي قال في ميتته حين مر عليه. He says about a corpse, it was like the corpse of a donkey or a dog that he passed by. He said, ما أحسن بياض أسنانها. How beautiful are its white teeth. When the companions were with him, said, ما أنتنا ريحها. It stinks. So when they're passing by a dead, decaying corpse, dog's corpse, it had like a foul stench. So the companions were like, it stinks. But the Prophet ﷺ said, what beautiful teeth. That's a Christic flavor. That's a Christic perspective, right? So quick recap, we can practice the entirety of the previous laws under Muhammad's laws. And this is because the spiritual realities of the previous prophets don't disappear. They're still accessible to anyone. But we practice them through his Sharia, right? And iconography is sanctioned by our own law. It's rooted in the law itself. So Christians worship God via physical forms, whereas Muslims worship God through the imagination. Now, in the next week, we're going to take a look at the metaphysics of beliefs, right? And how people of other religions are capable of reaching spiritual heights. But what is the goal of confirming other people in their beliefs? Why do we do it? And what are the consequences of doing that? Or what are the consequences of dismissing other people's beliefs on the day of judgment itself? It's connected to something called the beatific vision. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maham.
Assalamualaikum. Could you repeat the two types of Muhammadan ways the Muhammadan saint manifests? I missed one of them. I didn't quite get it.
This is back in the beginning, right?
Yeah, in this you said there was one who I'll write down.
Okay, so there are different kinds of prophetic saints, but they're not called Muhammadan except in two cases. The first case is if he implements or he's given a hukum, a legal hukum that was not given to the previous prophets. So that's specific to our Sharia. If this saint receives this hukum from Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam or in a vision, something like that, right? And he's able to implement the hukum, and it does not come from the previous laws, right? Then he's Muhammadan. If he inherits that hukum. The second Muhammadan is if he attains to the maqam la maqam, the station of no station, which means he has surpassed and encompassed all the stations, all the spiritual stations, right? And of course, the station of no station is the highest spiritual station possible. It's called maqam al-qurba, the station of nearness. The saint who attains to that station, he is Muhammadan too. And it's called the station of no station because he's not limited by any one of the stations. If you die in one of the stations, you're limited by that station. But the one who reaches maqam la maqam, he's not limited by any of the stations. Nothing can limit him. Nothing can stop him. This person's called Muhammadan.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, sorry, Zina, go ahead.
Wow, Jazakallah khair. That was really beautiful. I was wondering why is the Musawi saint or path called Shamsi? And also towards the end, like, the examples that you gave of the Christic, I guess how the Christic Zawq is kind of embodied. Does he give examples of how the Musawi tastes are embodied? And does he say anything about Sulaiman alayhi salam?
Yeah, he does about Sulaiman alayhi salam. But I'd have to go back and double check and see what he said exactly. And he probably talks about Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. If you want to know, look at his teachers. It's in the book called Sufis of Andalusia, which is the Ruh al-Quds fi Munasahat al-Nafs. He talks all about his teachers. You'll find it there. So one of his teachers who was called Al-Kummi. He's Musawi. So you'll see how he embodies those characteristics, right? The reason it's called Shamsi, I think it's connected to the karama I mentioned earlier on about Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam descending from Mount Sinai and his face is beaming with light. That's solar light. I think it's connected to that. The Musawi inheritance is solar. It is a light that blinds you. It is beaming, blinding light. And then I think you asked like a question before that, right?
I forgot, but right now I'm wondering also, I keep forgetting, subhanAllah. Excuse me. So the Isawi saint, I feel like you made this differentiation, like this, you distinguished these two earlier. I guess there's like inheriting from their heart versus like walking their path. So like for instance, I
Yes.
think Isa alayhi salam was, I think, celibate, right? And so I guess like are Isawi saints celibate, or I think like that's where the whole like monk thing is, like
Correct.
rahban.
So because Sheikh Al-Akbar was a Sawi in the beginning of his path, he was also celibate for a long time. Yeah, exactly. He was celibate for a very long time. Exactly. And of course, in Islam, when he comes back at the end of time, he's what Muhammadi. So he marries. Yeah, exactly. Tina, you had a question was right at the beginning, right? Let me see if I can just read it. So that I might have time to ask the question in advance. So I put it here in Shadik's section. His name. Okay, yes. Considering the distinction between physical senses and the other organs of perception, it should be understood that the conversation didn't take place in human form, but in another form. It can take place in dreams, for example, even if it says he talked to me or something similar. Yeah. It can take form in the mind as well, or in dreams, for example. The same question goes for seeing the man. Seeing with the inner eye still requires shapes and forms as representations. Seeing with the imagination requires forms and representations. Seeing with the mind does not require forms. But I'll tell you something. It doesn't require form in the sense of like a rectangle or a triangle, okay? But it requires a mental form, which is a definition. The mind works with definitions. The definitions encapsulate the meaning of something. So definitions are forms, but they're the forms of the mind, just not pictures. If that makes sense, Tina. Great question. Thank you so much. Okay, any thoughts on that? I feel like I should have given it a bit more time. But then otherwise we'd be here for hours, I guess.
Just like a little bit. So what you were saying, the forms of the mind are definitions. So then,
yes,
if we see worship Allah as though we see Him, does that though? So I can completely understand that we can see Allah in the forms of a definition. But is it permitted if one would want to visualize Allah in the form of a person, for example? Would that be haram? Would that be permitted, or is that allowed? You know, the old man cleared.
Yeah. You're asking the question, Hannah. That's why I want to cover in the 10th session.
Oh, okay.
It's a super interesting question because the 10th session talks about witnessing God in form, but according to your belief.
Yeah.
According to your specific belief. So, but by the way, the short answer to your question is yes, it's permitted. In the imagination. But that's why we have the hadith where Rasul he saw God in form, in the most beautiful forms in his dreams, right? And he gives us a physical description, right? I think that the Hanbalis are attached to it, right? He's in the form of a beardless youth with long hair, wearing green silk and golden jewelry, right? And sandals. He saw him in that form in a dream. But is God actually that form? A'udhu billah, no way. He takes form, but he's not limited to that form, right? But for you to witness a form in your imagination, Ibn Arabi is saying it's permissible and it's desirable.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Zanira.
So today you said that one of the, I guess, Faisawi powers is like Himma. But I feel like earlier, I don't know if it was in Fusus or the path of knowledge that she said that it's Musa alayhi salam who had like the power of Himma as well. So I was just wondering, like, I mean, I can see how like Isa alayhi salam would have it because he's like forming, you know, shapes and stuff, but that's more like, I guess, a physical manifestation, but still like that's breathing spirit, right? Which is kind of what manifestation is, like if that's just in the mind.
Okay, so Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam, they both have it, but in distinct ways. But I'd have to think about it a little more just to grasp how they're distinct. So someone like Sulaiman alayhi salam, Sulaiman doesn't have himma. What does he have? He has the karama of he just asks for what he wants and it happens straight away. He just asks for what he wants and it comes. That's the Sulaimani inheritance. And then the inheritance of himma is Musawi and Isawi. It's in both. Yes, Ghada.
So I just want to follow with the question that we can like imagine God with the image of someone. So we like you know even with the iconography and like even we want to picture God in the best way.
Yes,
but
I think so too. Sorry, yeah.
But like you know what? Let's say if I go to Hinduism or other non-Abrahamic, they might picture God like let's say the goddess Kali or any other gods that they represent like the lower aspect of the world. So he'd like, you know, sometimes what I would say, like maybe we want to see God or Allah, like, you know, in a certain way that he's positive, he's beautiful, he's everything. But even if we go also in his names, we see Al-Muntaqim, we see Al-Mudhil. So you know what, I don't know if I'm able to explain exactly what is my thought.
No, you've explained
so
it.
We can associate
very
the positive
exactly.
thing, but we don't want to associate the negative things to Allah.
No. I completely get you. I completely get you. And I know exactly what you're saying because this question has been asked to me before as well, because it raises the question as to where do we draw the limits of our imagination? So I've not looked at the exact implications of how you're supposed to imagine him, right? But I imagine it's something like you said has to be beautiful. But let me ask you something. What's wrong with Kali?
I love Kali.
You see, because Kali has a scary image, right?
Yeah, but she has the power and
But
she has destructive energy whenever it's needed to be destroyed. No?
yeah, but yes, but it doesn't have to just be destructive. It doesn't just have to be destructive. That's just one aspect of Kali.
Yeah, I'm
Who
saying one
who
the aspects.
it's one. Yes. Who famous guru who took Kali as his main deity of worship. This is Ramakrishna, if you've ever heard of Ramakrishna.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ramakrishna took Kali as his guide, and she would assist him on his spiritual journey. So you are right, because someone, by the way, the other person who asked me the same question used Kali as the exact same example. The exact
That's
same
so
example, by the
interesting.
way. Because he wants, should you imagine Kali? Because you shouldn't imagine Kali. And I was like, look, man, I don't know. Because the hadith doesn't specify how you should imagine God. It just says you can. But for me, the zahir is that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not, or actually Rasulullah in the hadith, has not imposed a certain limitation. If I'm aware of a limitation, then we can impose that limitation. And we'll come back to this in the 10th session. But for me, the short answer, the zahir, right? The outward sense, the most obvious sense, the most obvious answer is that it's permitted.
I'm not talking about it's permitted, it's about us. We don't give ourselves permission. So we prefer to see Allah in the
Yes.
most beautiful image, but we don't give permission for ourselves, like, to see that He created Satan. No?
No, yes. No, Satan is a different subject, but yes, okay.
No, but I mean, He created the light and He created the dark. So we
Yes.
would like to see Allah in
Yes.
the light, but we don't want to see Him in the dark, let's say. The dark, which is the other side of the light, that الظاهر والباطن, or sometimes like, الضار النافع.
Yes. Actually, so you worship him according, so now there's worship and there's the actual salat. Okay. In your general interactions with the world, yes, you have to act in accordance with the Sharia. But with regard to your shuhud, you're witnessing, you shouldn't do what's called inkar. So there's i'taraf and there's inkar. You shouldn't do inkar of God even when you are seeing something that looks like something that you would call negative. You have to witness his face wherever you turn. That person is the true arif. But yes, when you are living your life, you should try to manifest the Jamali names. Correct. As opposed to the more Jalali names. Or the darker things. And that I completely agree with.
Thank you.
Zanira.
I just wanted to say that it doesn't say that Allah created the darkness and light. It says, الحمد لله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور. So there's
good.
like a differentiation between khalaqa and ja'ala. And I was talking about this like just from a linguistic perspective, and my teacher said that it might be because ja'ala is more like a matter of perspective, and light and darkness are relative, whereas I guess the sky and the earth are more concrete in whatever way. But also I wanted to ask, so like on the same question of like Hinduism, right? I forgot the words that you used, but one of them is like reverence versus worshiping. So it looks
Yes.
to us, or like to me at least, someone who's seen a lot of Hindu worship, um, that the Hindus actually worshiping the images. They don't just venerate them; they worship them. At least like what's it called, lay people, Hindus, right? But I feel like I remember, I think it's what was his name? She, oh God. Anyway, he's this really famous, like guru, and he had a
Mm,
debate with Dr. Zakir Naik, and Dr. Zakir Naik said, it says in the
mm,
Vedas that one God, there is no image of him, so why do you create images? And he said, well, not everybody can connect to God without an image. So we know that God does not have an image because that's what the Vedas say. And I think Upanishads say that as well. But because like people at a lower, let's say, spiritual level are not able to access God, they need an image to access. But that's what I guess he was talking about was veneration or iconography, right?
mm.
And then Dr.
But
Zakir
but
Naik
but
came
but
back
but
and
but
said,
you know what I don't like about that line. So, but it's not just you. Like that's the line we as Muslims usually give. We create our own images in our minds. No one can avoid images. So you say if you're of a lower spiritual level, you must have images, but we do images too. And in our heads, we do images for sure. But you know something? You raise a fantastic point. Some Hindus don't do veneration. They worship or some people, let's not say Hindus, let's say people. Some people worship the actual idols or images themselves, right? I covered that in session 7. So I don't care because there's one path for veneration and there's one path for worship. Because I cover them both. Yes, Shifa, I completely agree with what you're saying. Yes.
No, that was is that what you call a mic drop?
Is it? You tell me.
I don't know. It sounded like that.
I think Ibn Arabi really covers everything. He really does. I think it's important to put divinity, divine into context when interpreting them in relation to what God has said. When trying to imagine God acting through a particular name, of course, yeah. Which context do you mean, Shifa? But I think like I get what you mean. Doesn't Ibn Arabi believe that Allah has an infinite amount of attributes? So wouldn't that mean that Allah has positive? We don't say he has negative attributes. He has theological and negative attributes that like negates things from him, but they're not negative in the bad sense, like right. That's going into kalam. Yes, he has what are called sifat al salbiya, and then he also has the positive attributes, right? And then that's going into kalam. And I'm sorry, I'd love to say more, but I think like we're kind of out of time. Uh, Shifa, if you're there, let me know. But if not, I'll take one last question. Yes, Jamali and Jalaya attributes. Yeah, Zinir. Okay, last question. Let's go.
So, what was the name of the okay, the first question I had was like I've been thinking about this for a while. I keep forgetting it. So I
Yeah.
think I read it in Journey to the Lord of Power that the Sheikh Al Akbar says that it's three powers that every wali will eventually have: walking on water, walking in the air, and folding the land. But then he says that, I mean, his main like thing was like, don't go after the powers, go after God. And like, even when you get the powers, you keep going. Like, it's not about, that's not the end goal. If you stop, like,
Yeah.
take whatever is given to you of the universes, but don't stop. Just keep going because that's not your end goal. But yeah, I was just wondering how that, like, I guess, works with the whole, I think, I forgot the word, but something hukmi, it's Sibah hukmi of the Rasulullah versus Isa alayhi salam. So is it like all three of them have like an Isawi power comes and a Muhammadi power comes. And the other thing was about what was the name of the sheikh that you said? Was it? It's not Amir. It's I think. Oh God, his name is just so. But you said that he actually like he's the one that actually believes in like wahdat al-wujud, like that everything is actually God, and that his murid got bitten by a snake,
Oh,
and he
Haddad-Din
said,
Baliani.
right. So Haddadin Balyani, for him, like I guess that's just what it reminded me of the question of Kali. It's just like you wouldn't imagine a snake as God, but then whatever harm comes also can come through God's Jalal as a test to us. So yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. Of course, totally. That would mean a shift in perspective, right? But the first part of your question, let me think more about it, because otherwise I'll be here all night. But that's also a good question, mashallah. Mary talks about that, by the way, the different inheritances, like, but I skipped over it. It's actually in chapter 36. Actually, Zanira, I advise you, go through chapter 36. You'll find your answer there, inshallah, because Ibn Arabi talks about the difference between walking on air and walking on water, and what that means with regard to inheritance. But I just skipped those passages. I meant when trying to imagine attributes as an image, because images are interpretation themselves. So it needs like a context, like ilm al-ta'wil. Oh, of course. Yeah, Shifa. I totally agree with you. Yes, absolutely. Also, Shifa, the other thing is that I didn't cover it now, but the purpose of imagining God in the Salat, for example, Abdullah kanaka tara, so that's in the Salat, for example, it's to have hudur, it's called istihdar. So you're not doing ta'wil in the moment. That's a different issue, right? But in the salat, you're doing something called istihdar, which means making God present and becoming present to God. But we'll talk more about that in session 10, inshallah. So, okay, last question. So, a Buddhist worshipping Buddha in the temple, in a sense, yes, exactly. You've got Sheikh Al-Akbar. A Buddhist worshipping Buddha in the temple is, in a sense, correct and in a sense, incorrect. That is exactly Sheikh Al-Akbar to the T. Correct in one sense and incorrect in another sense. Yes, my friend. Thank you, Sidi Walid. And Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was given ta'wil of the images. Yes, he was given ta'wil of the dreams, which have images in them. You are correct, Zanira. Yes. There's also more to say about Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, but I won't say it now. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Any other thoughts and questions? Please put them into the chat room. And yeah, I'll see you next week, inshallah. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Bless you.
You too. Bye-bye. Mashallah.